Hi everyone, and welcome to my messy desk. So I know that this camera is not the greatest for recording, and certainly not the sound isn't the greatest either, but it's the easiest to do all this over the top of my art table rather than try to move everything. So I have spent the last while determining my 12 colors for the year. I went through all of my paints. I swatched various colors from the different brands that I really like. And so I'm going to kind of swatch those out like we did before, but I want to talk a little bit. People have asked me about art supplies and, you know, my favorites and that kind of thing. And so I thought I would do a quick rundown of my favorite supplies. Now, I want to, have a caveat here that everybody has a different level of what they want to spend on painting supplies. Some people are just in it for just having some fun with color, and there are a variety of different ways in which you can get cheaper art supplies just to get in there and have a lot of fun with color. But this video is more just my particular favorites, keeping in mind that art supplies and paint supplies are something that I do put my disposable income into. I enjoy them. I've made a deck that's has been for sale. I'm working on another deck. So I take it, it's a step up from a hobby a little bit for me in terms of I want the good stuff. The other thing is that I have started from the bottom up, so to speak, and what I've personally learned along the way is that if you want to learn to paint, if you're, serious about getting into painting, that the supplies do matter to a degree. There were things that I found myself, I kept taking steps up. I started with a very simple little circle pans of watercolor that I had got at Michael's for very cheap. And just to see if I would even like it. And then I was like, oh, I kind of like that. But, it was very cheap watercolor paint. I was like, this, isn't quite what if I really want to get serious about it, this isn't, the pigment's not quite there. I have no clue what these colors are. So then it was like a movement from there to Winsor & Newton Cotman, which is a student grade, but a very good student grade of paint. And that is an excellent set. I do not have one anymore to show you, but you can get those at, for sure, Michael's if you're in the United States. They're fairly cheap, especially at Michael's if you use a coupon for them. You can get a nice set of pans that work really beautifully for a student grade level of paint. I found them to dry a little bit dull after a while when I was watching other people's videos and watching people paint. I was like, why are mine, not drying the same or not mixing the same? And that's where I think I started to see the real difference is in when you start to mix the colors together to make new colors with the student grade, which aren't always single pigments. They're often multi-pigments, or they're just hues versus the actual pigments, and so you're not getting the same results when you're watching somebody that's using the actual pigments. And so that's when I decided, okay, I need to take another step forward here. So you can follow that same path, or you can say, okay, you know what, I'm actually gonna, especially this, if we're doing this by across the year, you could literally pick up one small tube of paint every month, and so over the course of the year then you would have your whole palette, kind of build your palette together off of some good. There are also several nice starter sets. I think M. Graham has a set. I think Daniel Smith has, I'll put a couple links to some of those kind of starter sets from some of the names that I'm going to be talking about right now, where you can get just a few colors to mix, because really you could get 3 colors. You can get a yellow, a red, and a blue, and you could mix all different colors with those 3 colors, and kind of start there. So there's things that you can do to start small, but still gain, have good color pigments to work with, because it does make a difference. I will also say that paper makes a difference. You know, I'd like to fully get behind, get yourself the cheapest paper, get yourself the cheapest paint. It doesn't matter. In a sense, it doesn't. Can you make art with any piece of paper and any paint? 1000% yes, you can. But if there are just some people in the group who are using this as an opportunity to actually dive into watercolor, so I did want to make this video for them, if you just to see, okay, across the time, across playing around with a lot of paint. So let me just do a quick look at my paint collection. I have done videos of this before, but, you know, let's just bring it all out here and do a quick look at all of the paints that I have, or that I'm kind of working from. So Sennelier is one of my favorites at the moment. One of the things that I have learned after playing with a lot of paint and a lot of colors and a lot of brands, is that some of it is also knowing what you're going to do, what you want the paint to do for you. So Sennelier is beautiful, but it is it's very transparent, and it makes, when you first lay it down, it can be kind of disappointing, because it is made, or it shines when you put several layers on top of themselves. I don't know what that sound was. I've never heard that one out of my phone. Okay, sound like a doorbell. It shines when you put layers on top, and the layers don't get muddy, they just glow. So I love this when I'm looking for transparency. The only one that I've taken out of here is the lemon yellow for my set, because I don't actually use a lot of cool yellows, and this is my, and when I do want it to sort of glow and be transparent, and so that's the color I've chosen out of here. I have many favorites here. I absolutely love this transparent brown, but it is you know, knowing what you're going to use it for. When I'm going to do lots of layers that I don't want to get muddy and I want to continue to glow, I absolutely love Sennelier paints. It's one of my top favorites. I guess we'll go through my top favorites. So that's one that I looked at. My other top favorite, probably, I don't know. It's hard. I'm not going to keep saying, because I was surprised when I went through to pick my 12. So Daniel Smith is definitely one of my top favorites. It's right up there. Very different from Sennelier. The reason I love Daniel Smith is because of the granulation, that the textures that the colors can dry in. So instead of drying smooth, which sometimes you want, they have beautiful granulation. Now, many different brands and many different pigments granulate, but Daniel Smith, there's something about theirs that are just amazing. Now, I wanted to say, and I'll I'm going to try to link as much as I can below, but one of the things that you can get from Daniel Smith are these dot charts. Now, these dot charts, you can get a smaller set, or you can get the full set where you can get all of their colors in these really nice dots. And there's quite a bit of paint that's there that you can wet. And you know, that comes just with a dot. I've gone through and swatched these all out so that I can see exactly what the color is. But there's quite a bit of pigment there to actually use as well. So it's not wasted. Sometimes I just want a specific color or I'm getting ready to buy a color. I can just swatch it right. I'm at some point going to get this deep sap green. I'm one of those people who can't have too many greens, right? So this allows you to swatch everything out. Or again, if I just want to get a pop of a color that I don't need, I don't use maybe a whole lot of oranges, but I want a pop of this beautiful quinacridone sienna. I've got plenty here to put a pop of that into something. And so it functions both as a wonderful swatching, so that when I order, I'm ordering, you know, I know what I'm getting. But then it also allows you to play around with this. So this is a great introduction to figuring out what colors you really want without spending a ton of money. So this is the 238 color chart set here. I think there's a 66 color. There's another one that's a bit smaller and a little cheaper. This was about 20 bucks. But when you figure out, you know, when you compare what a tube of paint costs, this is definitely a smart move, so that you, again, are purchasing the colors that you don't have any of those, ugh, why did I get that particular color? Because it wasn't, you know, it wasn't what I was looking for. So this is, dot charts are a great way when people offer. Unfortunately, not all companies offer them, but Daniel Smith, which is one of my favorite brands of paint, does offer this if you just want to check them out and start to get a feel for them. So Daniel Smith, my Daniel Smith is actually a little bit low. I've got a list of ones that I need to actually replace. Yeah, so definitely one of my top types of colors. And again, because of their texture and granulating property is generally why I'm going to reach for a Daniel Smith over a different color. The other one, just going off of the colors that I chose, and this is what a surprise to me, is M-Gram. M-Gram is paint that uses honey as its base, so it stays a little sticky. Now, I've taken it out of its tin because I'm using its tin, and I'm also going to be creating a larger tin of this, so they're out. But I purchased just a mixing set. So I purchased a red, I purchased a yellow, I purchased a blue to be able to mix. I purchased two earthy colors, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, because I always have to have those for earth. And then I ordered a raw umber for earth. So I purchased a very small mixing palette just so that I could test it out. And then I ended up later ordering this transparent red iron oxide, which is one of my absolute all-time favorite colors. I need to stick this somewhere that I use them a lot because I absolutely love this color. So that was just sort of a separate one I bought. But this was a 6 colors mixing palette just to test out the colors. What I found is that I really love the smoothness and the bright pigmentation, how easy it is to re-wet. It's actually quite a beautiful brand of paints. And again, the cost of paints is going to vary depending on where you are. So if something is made in the United States, of course, it's going to be cheaper in the United States. If like Schmincke or even Sennelier, to buy in the United States costs more than to buy in Europe because of where they're made. And so that does play a role in what are, good paints price-wise. So I'm not really going off of prices here, but my favorites are, the ones that I go to the most are Sennelier as well as Daniel Smith. And then the M-Gram for just the beautiful, straight, clean, basic colors. I'm actually quite falling in love with that. The other brand that I do love for smooth colors is Holbein. Now, Holbein is not too expensive, depending again where you buy it. Sets that you can buy. I ended up getting a really good deal on a large set that got me going quite well on Holbein. And then my friend and I split some paints and things of that nature. What I love about Holbein is this smooth, clean, gorgeous color, high pigment. It does have granulating colors. Again, some of that is the actual pigment, but when I want just a clean, fresh wash of brilliant color, I tend to go towards Holbein. So again, it depends on what, if you just love brilliant jewel tones, Holbein might be a color that you a brand that you absolutely love. Because of that property. So I do, Holbein is high up there for me. So I would say my top three are probably Sennelier, Holbein, and Daniel Smith, but I will say I'm kind of moving towards none of the Holbein made it onto my 12 color, whereas quite a few M-grams did, which again has that rich pigment, smooth. So the whole, you know, M-gram might take over that. Core is a interesting brand. I have a small palette of these. They are extremely brilliant, vibrant colors, and they move a little bit strangely on the paper, which is something that I enjoy, but it's kind of like, oh, you know, watercolor is already a little bit crazy on the paper, so I don't know that I would recommend this as a beginner set. I have got two sets, one of their vibrant, I think, chroma colors, and then an earth tone set to play around with, and so I use them for pops for the most part, or if I want this, it does this kind of interesting spite, which we'll talk, maybe I'll do some more about that kind of thing later, but it kind of spiders out in a way that's quite different than other paints, and so I use this. I love it, but I use it more as like pops when I want it to do that particular effect. Schmincke, I haven't done a lot of work yet. At first light, and I'm going to play around with it more. At first light, a lot of people love Schmincke. Definitely a softer tone colors than I find for myself. I love vivid color. And so for me, while the Sennelier first starts out light tones, it layers into beautiful jewel tones. Whereas I haven't quite spent a lot of time with the Schmincke, and it's beautiful, but to me it just lacks a little bit of vibrancy that I particularly love in watercolor paints. Some other people might, and there's some of these colors I love. This, you can tell even by this pan is so low. Perylene Green in the Schmincke Perylene Green is stunning. I absolutely love it. I love this Potter's Pink. I don't actually like the Potter's Pink from Daniel Smith, surprisingly. I don't know if I just got a bad batch because it does really weird foaming things, so I probably have to try another, but I love the Schmincke's Potter's Pink. I love any of the you can see the Perylene Violet. I've used that a lot because I quite love that. So I'm working on it. At the moment, it hasn't like stolen my heart at all. And then the White Nights, which we talked about in the other one, which is a low end but artist grade pigment. Again, you can see there's quite a lot of vibrancy that's here to be had, and a lot of single pigments versus student grades and other cheaper type paints that either are using dyes and hues or they're using multiple pigments, which is beautiful, fine sometimes when you swatch it out, but when you go to mix it, you start to get mud really easily. So this, I think, is a nice option for fairly cheap price. So you saw me, so those are all of the brands that I've worked with. My top favorites being Sennelier. Right at the moment, based off of this, I'm going to say my tops would actually be M-gram, Daniel Smith, and I do love Sennelier, even though not many Senneliers got on here, and that's because for this palette, I am kind of looking for that pop, that vibrancy pop, because I'm not using a lot of colors here. So that's why the Sennelier isn't so much showing up on here, but I still absolutely love them. So I'm going to swatch these out in comparison. So I actually changed out, I've made some changes because I literally went through all of my paint collection, pulled out all my tubes of paint, swatched all kinds of colors next to each other, and I picked my, 12 like holy grail, following this cool yellow, warm yellow, cool red, warm red, cool blue, warm blue, cool green, warm green, and then the three earth colors and the dark. Now, I ended up switching to a lunar black, so I added a black in. So this palette is, you can get this White Night set for about $30 in the US Amazon. I will put a link to this below. And this is artist grade paint, and most of it is single pigment. All of mine are single pigment except for the sap green, because that is a convenience mix. So sorry for the noise, I went through I'll put this up in the group. I went through and to show all of the colors that I chose, what the pigment number is so that it can be compared, because not every brand uses the same pigment. Even though it says ultramarine green, blue, it may use a completely different pigment, and that's why they don't look the same. So I went through and did that all out for myself, and the only one that is not a single pigment is the sap green, because that is a convenience mix, but it is a green that I use so much that I really had to have this on the palette. And I also have some other colors that you can use in place of those. So I'll put this up on the group just in case people are, if there's anybody else out there who is paint crazy like me, to see why I came up with what I want. But these two are actually very comparable in terms of the colors that are here, including the blacks. And so I'm going to swatch those next to each other. Again, this is about $30 for 12 full pans. That is quite cheap for an artist grade, mostly single pigment colors. These can run each one of the tubes of paint to, if you got these individually, probably run around $10 US dollars. Some could be a little under 10, some could be over 10. I'll try to find links to all the ones that I actually purchased. So you're talking about, of course, one tube is going to fill multiple half pans. So this is a half pan versus a whole pan. And you're going to obviously get multiple uses out of that, but it's an expenditure up front that is certainly higher. So I'm not saying this is what you need to do. I'm saying that I've gone through all my colors and this is my ultimate 12 colors. So we're going to come back to that in just a minute, but I want to talk a little bit about all of my favorite tools. And again, please remember that I have been painting for a little while now, a couple years. I have accumulated things. I have also come to understand and know what I love and what I don't love, what I use and what I don't use. And what I use may be very different than you. I tend to paint relatively small. I would say this size is probably the largest size that I paint, which is for my Oracle deck. I can't remember the dimensions. This is 9, and actually now I'm not even painting on this size. This was one of the earlier ones. So this is like 9 by 6 or so. This is a terrible ruler. I do not recommend this ruler. But most of the time I am painting on this size, which is 7 1/4. This has to do with proportions of what I'm going to shrink it down to by 4 3/4. So generally I'm painting on down to smaller sizes. So I do like to paint small. It's just my preferable form of painting. So my brushes are going to be different than brushes that you might use. So please take all that into account. Okay, so I know, so many qualifications, but I know this is sort of like the ultimate. This is what I've learned and what I've grown to know and love. So one thing, so these are good. I'm just running through my essentials as quick as I can. Some kind of a hard board. This is actually, I got these at Michael's. I think you can also get these at Hobby Lobbies in the United States, and in any kind of a paint supply, craft, art store. It's made to use, I don't even know what it's called. But it's made, I think, to paint like acrylics and oils on. It's like a hard board. You can also use a clipboard or something like that. But what I do is I like to use these. I have various sizes, and I tape my because I usually paint small. This is generally a great size for me, and I tape down the paper that I am getting ready to paint on. So this is sort of, that I can move it, I can tip things around. And so this, again, I have a little tiny one. I have this size, and then I have a larger size tucked away somewhere. So something like this to tape your work down is something that I use all the time. So these are things I use all the time. tape. I personally use this clean release duct tape. You can get at any place where, even for house painting. I have some smaller that you can get in like a drafting section at a craft store. Like I got this at Michael's. I tend to like this thicker one actually. I use a lot of water when I paint, so I like a good stick down. So this has been my favorite so far, but you want like a blue painter's tape that doesn't stick so hard. So it sticks good enough, but it releases and doesn't rip your paper when you pull it up. So I go through lots of this. So that's something. In terms of mixing palettes, now my daughter just got me this for Christmas and I'm really loving it. This is one of my favorites. Again, I'll put links to everything that I can find links to. I am a person who loves porcelain. I've given up mixing on other kinds of things. You can get porcelain plates. You probably have a white porcelain plate in your cupboard. If not, very often in grocery stores and things, you can get porcelain plates. You can get porcelain egg that has all like for putting in hard-boiled eggs. Those make nice multi-wells. My issue is that I have a small space, number one, and number two, I actually don't often mix giant amounts because I'm painting small. So I love to mix on porcelain. So this is the main one that I use all of the time. I tend to put like a thicker here and then pull it down here into making washes and things like that down into these wells. But then again, as I said, my daughter got me this for Christmas and I've used it a few times and I love it because I can make different colors. If I just need a little of one color, I can just mix it in a little well, and it gives me a lot of little spaces in a very small space because, again, space is an issue. So porcelain for me for mixing my paints on. And why is that? I don't know if I can give an example because I've not tried to. Let's just see here. You'll see that plastic, see how plastic just kind of makes a bead right there? Now, as you use it, it can get better. It also starts to stain over time, but it makes it hard to see when you were to start to mix that with, say, another color. It can make it a little bit harder to see exactly the composition, how much water per pigment that you might have, and that can I just don't like it. You can't see how much you've mixed very well, and you can't see the often the color as well, and then it also ends up staining the plastic, and so that is that's one of the reasons I don't like plastic. And you can work at it and you can get it a little bit better, but it's not my favorite to use. If you were to look closely, you can see it's already starting to stain here. So it's just not my favorite compared to, let's do the same thing over here. See how that stays? It's still gonna puddle a little bit, but you can really get a good idea of what it is that you have, how much paint you have, the color mixture that you have, the pigment to water. It's just, for me, there's just no comparison. Paper towels also, many paper towels, and there is actually a preferred paper towel. I believe they are called Viva. They have no quilting on them, so that when you go to dab in clouds, you don't get quilting on your clouds. So this actually is my absolute favorite brand for watercolor painting. I only buy it for my painting table. I will put a link to that below. You will use lots and lots of paper towels. Of course, you can also use fabric and just rewash it as well. Okay, so I'm kind of working my way through here. So this porcelain palettes. For water, I also like porcelain because I'm painting a lot. I'm always cleaning these out. These are actually, I found these at Hobby Lobby. They're made to be decorative, but they are little like porcelain coated things, and I really like them. These are two littler ones, but these are the ones that I use for the most part, and they're big square tubs. It says Farm Fresh. Again, it's made to be decorative, but I was able to use a coupon on them, and I'm starting to get a little bit of a wear in one, so I'll have to replace it. Again, they were fairly cheap with a coupon, and they're easy to clean up because they've got that line of porcelain on them, and it's a lot of water, which I like. So ideally you should have 2 things, one for dirty water and then one to pick up your cleaner water. And so I did for a long time. Mason jars work really good for that. I find that these work really great. You can just use cups. You don't really want probably to be drinking from the cups, especially if you're using real pigments, because some pigments like cadmium colors are toxic, and you don't really want to have any of that residue on there. So I tend to keep that stuff separate then from my drinking cups. So porcelain for mixing, 2 mixing containers. I like a big mixing container because I don't want to change water all the time. That's just me personally. These I got because these work nice when I just need a small project. Again, mason jars, just glass cups, you know, anything works there, but my favorite is porcelain coated. This isn't my favorite, so I guess it's okay to say my favorites. Okay, so in terms of brushes and things, this is all going to depend, size-wise, this is all going to depend on how you paint, how large you paint. But these are my most used brushes. And again, I didn't start out with these, so, you know, have grace. These are things that I've accumulated. These are Derwent. This is a Derwent's Graphite HB pencil. It's my favorite pencil for drawing on watercolor paper. Doesn't mix in and make the colors too muddy. It erases off of it fairly well. It's just the one that I use the most. I do have a really nice mechanical pencil that I also like. But I do, which is a Kurutoga, I think it's a Uniball pencil, 05. And so I like this as a mechanical pencil. But sometimes this bites into the paper a little more than I'd like. So these are the 2 pencils that between these 2, these are my favorite pencils. I also like microns for putting like the black line. If you want to put ink onto your paper, I tend to use microns for that. They don't re-wet. They don't smear. You know, once it's dried, you can paint on it and it doesn't wet. So I generally use 05 and 03, which I actually need to get another 03. 01s I really like for the very fine line, but the watercolor paper chews up that tip so fast that for me it's not really worth it. So I tend to work with 03 and 05. But I don't do a lot of ink on, I do in sketchbooks, but not as much in actual paintings. So I don't use these a lot, but when I do, it tends to be microns. So that's the pens and pencils. Brushes, I really love the Black Velvet Silver brushes. They are not the most expensive and they are not the cheapest. I got a gift certificate last year to Amazon from my boss for Christmas, and I bought a bunch of these. The ones that I use the most is this 8 round. Watercolor, you tend to really want rounds for the most part. This Silver 6, I probably use the most of the Black Velvet Silver. I have a bunch of other ones. Like I said, I got all the ones that I wanted on my wish list last Christmas. So I have several different, I have a dagger brush, but mostly rounds because rounds are mostly what you end up using. But these are the ones that I use the most, which is an 8 round, a 6 round, and then these are a different brand. These are a bit pricier. Again, because they're so small, it makes it not as bad. The larger brushes of the same line can get a little bit expensive, but these are my favorite for these small brushes. This is Winsor & Newton Series 7, and this is a 0 and a 000. I want to pick up a 1 of this as well. Now, this is sable, so those of you who don't want to use animal fur, you probably would not obviously want that. I cannot remember if these, I think these have animal hair. So you'll want to check that if that is a problem. There are good synthetic brands that you can look for as well. This is a cat's tongue. It's the shape of it is a cat's tongue, and it is Princeton Neptune 1/2 inch. This is one of my absolute favorites. It gets really nicely pointed, but it also has a nice mop on it. I use this brush, I would say, probably almost every single time that I paint. Absolutely love it. And then this Neptune quill, this is a Princeton Neptune quill number 4. I just for slopping a lot, it's a quill, and it gets very fine, but it holds a ton of water, which can make it a bit of a pain painting with it. But when I want to slop things around, I do love this. So these are probably my most used brushes that I use. I would say that to get started, a good, probably, again, depending on whether you want to do tiny detail or not, but just to get started, I would say probably an 8 and a 6 round. And you could even, if you want to get 3, you could even get like a 4. See how nice of a point this goes into. But see, I don't think there's so much of it. Yeah, I mean, there is. You could even maybe go down to a 2 to have a broad range. To get really nice tips on them. So depending on how small, I would say maybe an 8 and a 6 and a 2, and just call it good. Because this is for very, very fine details, and I don't think you probably will start there. Maybe you will, but I doubt it. So these 3 rounds, I think that would probably be a good start to a collection. But yeah, so these are my favorites. These are the ones that I use the most. These are almost always, I don't even put them in the jar because they're almost always out and I'm almost always using them. Those are my favorite brushes. I have lots of brushes. I have a lot of brushes, from really cheap brushes to the ones that I actually ended up really sticking on, which were these. The other thing that I really recommend, and this doesn't have to be expensive, this is, I think, just a Master's Touch from Hobby Lobby, and this is a little fan brush. I really like fan brushes for texture, for just getting in there and making, weird scrunches, and for making grass and leaves and trees and stuff. I'm a big fan of a fan brush. I have a larger one, but because I paint small, I'm almost always using this smaller one. And again, I wouldn't spend a lot of money on one. I would just get because it's not something that you spend a lot of time with. And then there's flat brushes, which are nice. I do use them sometimes. And there's filbert brushes. Like, there's all kinds of brushes, right? It's all the brushes. But these are the ones that I pretty much always use. So I'm just going with that. The other thing that I would recommend is one of these. This is a Uniball Signo, and this is the Angelic one. So this is a white gel pen, and this is great for adding white highlights at the end when you maybe took your paper away, all the paper is gone, you want to have some spots of white. The Uniballs are the best. The 2 that most people recommend are these Uniballs. So this is the Uniball Signo Broad. This tends to be a little bit thick for me because, again, I do paint smaller, so I tend to find myself using this Uniball Angelic the most. I don't use it actually a lot, but I do, the times in which I want to have it, right? And so that's that. In terms of an eraser, you can get these moldable gray erasers. I actually think these are the best. They're great for watercolor because when you're erasing, they tend to pick up the graphite instead of leaving it on the paper. They don't chew up your paper. You want to erase as least as possible on watercolor paper because you're pulling up the sizing, but sometimes you do need to erase, and the gray sort of pliable eraser is what's recommended and certainly what I use the most. I'm trying to other things, salt. I use a ton of salt. In fact, I need to get some smaller salt because I have a salt grinder, so I need to actually grind me some salt here. I use salt in almost every painting that I make. Salt does lovely things to paint. And it creates texture, and I'm just all about texture. I don't know really if this color is going to be the greatest. I want to get a dark color to slop in there. There we go. Now, some paints granulate all on their own, which is great, but when you sprinkle salt into a painting and then let it dry, it sucks in pigment and leaves all kinds of speckles and things of that nature within the painting. Let's see if I can give an example. I use it almost all of the time. I don't even know what you can see because I can't see. It creates speckles and stuff in the, here you can see it. Creates texture in the paint in a really beautiful, well, I consider beautiful way. If you like texture, you can see it down here in the bottom of these little mini paintings. So yeah, it creates texture, and I love texture. So I tend to almost all the time sprinkle some salt somewhere in a painting. So I always have this little thing of salt, and then again a water bottle, because the same thing, when you spray your paint, it causes the pigment to move. So whereas you might make where you might make a nice, line, but you want that line to move. Of course, I put a lot of water there, but you can spray it and you can cause the paint to move, and then you can shift it around and move it. And so I constantly am using spray bottles. I have a very fine one. This makes an ultra fine mist. And then I use this one a lot for big blobs of water there. So water bottles, they're a painter's friend. Get that out of the way. Okay, so we talked about this, we've talked about this, we've talked about porcelain, we've talked about brushes and paints and pencils and things of that nature. Are we covering everything? Oh, paper. So paper is one of those things that I want to say, buy cheap paper. It isn't the same experience as doing it on good paper. And if you're like me, you paint small, one of the nice things is that, your paper does last you a little longer. But my absolute favorite, and the only one I actually use to paint with, is Arches. So this is Arches 300 GSM, 140 pound. This is cold press. Think about when you get cold and you get goosebumps. This is a rougher paper, and this is what I primarily paint on. I like the way that it grabs paint. I like the texture that it creates. Again, all about texture. And so that's primarily what I use is Arches cold press 300 GSM 140 pound paper. This is pure cotton. This is not wood or, well, yeah. So it's not the same as some of the cheaper student grades. Not that, again, you can't use them. What I found, I was using for a long time the Strathmore 400, which is the highest level of the Strathmore paper. But because it's pulp, not pure cotton, because I like to use a lot of water, I like to do a lot of layers, the paper just starts to disintegrate and pill up. The water doesn't move the same way. The paper buckles a lot more. You're just fighting against your paper. So again, if you're just in a sketchbook, this doesn't matter. I'm giving you, this is just what I've landed on my favorite things, and I use Arches. Now I have recently gotten a pad of Arches hot pressed. So the difference, think of running an iron across something and making it super smooth. So it's still 300 GSM, 140 pound pure cotton, but it's much smoother. You use this if you like botanicals, if you don't want so much of that texture. And what I found is when you want to get little details in, which is very hard to do in the bumpy a cold press, then you kind of need the hot press if you like small details and or like the thin, beautiful light washes that you see over botanical paintings. They often recommend a hot press for that type of thing. So Arches is my brand of choice. Not cheap. I wait for a 50% off coupon on Michaels, which sells the pads, and I purchase it there, and that's kind of just how I just accept that it's the paper that I want to use. Okay, papers. I think that's everything. There's lots of little things, like I couldn't personally live without this heat gun. This was about $10 with a coupon. Again, I'm a coupon shopper. I get a coupon, run to the craft store. So I think this was $25 originally, and then I had a 50% off coupon at Joann Fabrics. But you can get heat guns most craft stores, and I use this so that because I'm impatient. I don't like to wait for things to dry. So in between layers, I dry with this. You got to be careful not to get too close and burn the paper. It's very hot. It's not a hair dryer, but it doesn't blow air as hard as a hair dryer, which moves my paint around, which I don't want it to do. And so this works much better than a hair dryer, and dries faster, and it doesn't blow the paint around. And the style, and I use this a lot. I mean, it's a style that I just use. I will sometimes be drying and painting at the same time, because sometimes I get paint where I want it and I want it to stay there. I don't want it to continue to migrate, so I've got to stop it there. It's just, you know, again, everybody has their own style, and I use this heat gun a lot. So that would be something I would say I use all the time when I paint. Okay, I have no clue how long this is, but those I would say are the things that I use on a continual basis and are my favorite things to use in terms of watercolor paint. So I'm going to move. Again, it's always helpful to have lots of little jars. I'm going to move these. I just should have done as I went, but did I think of it? No. All I want to do here is put a swatch of color, because I want to see it on this other paper right next to the ones that I've chosen. I will say that carmine is gorgeous. Definitely opaque, not very transparent. Wait a minute. On my palette, reds, it should go into the blues. Sorry, I want it to match up to my palette, which is going to go from here. You can see how it looks a little different on this paper, because this is the cold press, or hot press, I'm sorry. There's the ultramarine, and then into the cool green, and into this really gorgeous dark green. I do like this. I think I'm on the back side of this paper. It is definitely beading a little bit, but that's okay. I'm going to be comparing them to each other. And then into yellow ochre. They're pretty. It's just they're very transparent and not very heavy pigment, but it definitely shows up more on this paper than on the cold press. So the hot press brings out the vibrancy a little bit more. They've also had chance to wet too, so this may be one of those things that you need to give a spritz to. Most of the color paints that I use re-wet really quickly and well, and so I don't get in the habit of doing so. But very often with watercolor, you want to reactivate those. So when you get started painting, you might want to spritz your palette and let it start to activate. And this may be that it just needs to do that, being, you know, not the same paint as the other ones that I use. So put those aside. Put that to the side and let that dry. So these are the colors that I've chosen to work with. So I'm going to, I should probably, see I very often put things in to make this green, so I should probably clear this particular color as well. And this is a very transparent yellow, and I'm aware of that. It's something that I actually quite like about it. I'm using quinacridone gold. Now, some of these are also still wet, which means I'm going to pick up a lot more pigment. I'm using quinacridone gold, which can get really rich and vibrant for a warm gold, but that's because it's one of my favorite colors. And then I am using Alizarin. Again, I know I'm picking up a lot because it's still wet. But this is a beautiful, cool tone red. And a little and more transparent. I think all of mine I picked were transparent, except for Jadeite is semi-transparent, and I think the two of the earths are semi-transparent, because I do like to work with transparent watercolor. So that, again, can make a difference depending on the pigment number and the color. That is a beautiful, I'm using Naphthol Red. I'm using one of my all-time favorite colors, which is Prussian Blue. And it's just a stunning, cool blue. Love it. And then I'm using actually M. Graham's. I really had a struggle between Daniel Smith and M. Graham's Ultramarine Blue. A big struggle, but I'm going to give the M. Graham's a go. And then I'm using Daniel Smith's Jadeite, which is actually made out of gemstone. And I think I picked up... And it can get really dark and beautiful, but it can also go really light. Now, you'll see that it's not as cool tone looking as the one in the, because I don't use a lot of straight cool. You could also use a Viridian here. I never use Viridian when it's on my palette. I know what I use, and so I'm kind of picking something that is still considered cool, and it can go cooler depending on how thinned out it is, but it can go really dark too. And then a sap green, which this sap green is Daniel Smith's, and it's just because it's colors that I use all the time. And so that's, you know, you go with what you know you love and what works for you. So it's my alt. I can't not have sap green in a palette. And that is a mix of multiple colors that you can mix up on your own palette, or you know, mix it for yourself. But I use it so much that, you know, I like it to remain consistent, and rather than me having to try to guess and get the colors right. The Jadeite, and that was both Daniel Smith. Then I have a Daniel Smith yellow ochre. I have a lot of yellow ochres because I love yellow ochre, and this one won out. And the M. Graham burnt sienna surprised me. I have a lot of burnt siennas because it's one of my favorite colors, and the M. Graham definitely, like, hands down, one on the color that I like. You mix a lot of a beautiful way to test burnt sienna is with mixing it with ultramarine, can make gorgeous gray tones. Really beautiful. And then one of the reasons that I decided to get rid of my sepia was that M. Graham's raw umber, especially on, you know, the paper that I generally use, this is much smoother paper than I normally use, it can get intensely rich. Let's see if I have a paper piece right here. it can get really beautifully dark. And I put it next to the sepia I use, and it's very similar to the sepia. It uses the same pigment. And so because of that, I felt like, okay, I can go sepia with that, and then that leaves me to put the black in. I went back and forth because I was actually going to maybe go with Payne's Gray, which is a blue toned dark that makes lovely shadows. But I really don't use that color a lot anymore, and I use Lunar Black because it dries to really beautiful gray, and it's gorgeous pigment. So it makes a wonderful ground, landscapey grounds, shadows and stuff. So I just really love Lunar Black. So that's what I decided on. So those are the colors, and again, this isn't the paper that I use. That's another, another fun exercise would be doing this. I don't use this smooth paper, which changes the way things look. It actually, the darker, as you can see, can really make the colors pop into a darker level. It holds on to the colors, and you get these I just love cold press watercolor paper. It's my primary thing that I paint with. Let's see, then you can pick it up and move it along. You can spritz it. You can throw some salt on there. Let that dry. Get that granulating. You can go over here and spray it and let things start to move around. Anyways, I love some watercolor paint. So those are the colors that I chose. Again, a mix of Daniel Smith and M. Graham for the most part, with one Sennelier in there because I don't use a lot of vibrant yellows, and when I do, I really want it to pop. Definitely went not such a cool tone of the cool green for me personally. This is often recommended to be like a phthalo green or a viridian green, which is a very cool green that you almost never would use by itself because you don't see that color, especially when it's lighter than that. You don't see that color in nature. And so you're always going to mix that with something to warm it up or something of that nature because you just don't see leaves that look that way. So you might, mix in some yellows into it to turn it into like a leafy green or something of that nature. And so you're generally not going to use that straight up by itself. And so I just really like earthy greens. And they're greens that I use a lot. So that's why my choices are there. So I'm going to stop here. I will put this list up in the group of the colors that are in my personal 2019 colors and some of these options that you can use. I'll also put the pigment color just in case there's some people out there who want to know the actual pigment in case they're looking to get options. So this has that in there, and I'm just going to copy this up or put the PDF of this up so that you can take a look at it if you want to. And again, I'll put as many links as I can find things of below. And of course, in other countries, you're going to probably have to look in other places. Remember that there are art sites like Jerry's Artorama in the United States, like Dick Blick's. I know there's one in the UK that's quite popular that you can order from, that you can often get discounts on things. I mostly purchase things either on Amazon, or my friend Bart lives in Poland, where a lot of times these paints are cheaper. So we'll sometimes buy tubes of paint and then split them. And so if you have friends that are doing this, that's another way. Sometimes you can try other paints. A lot of these paints, Bart and I bought tubes of and split. I have another friend lives in the United States who a lot of our Holbein, she paints with Holbein, so we'll buy a tube and then split it. And so that can be very helpful as you're trying, until you really settle on, okay, I know my favorites, right? It's a good way to do that. So look below in the description if you have any questions. We've got, let's talk about it, right? We'll talk about it on the group, or talk about it in the comments here below. And I'm going to stop talking because I have talked too much.